Okay, imagine this. It's 1829. Two ordinary fishermen, Norwegians, just vanish up in the Arctic ice.
Right. Gone.
Then, decades later, one of them turns up, but his story, well, it's so out there, so unbelievable. It lands him in a mental asylum for 28 years.
Yeah, a huge chunk of his life.
But just before he died, this is in 1908, he finds an author. And he tells him everything, gives him maps, the whole story, claims it proves the earth is hollow and will change. Well, everything.
And welcome to the deep dive. We're talking about Olaf Jansen, the fisherman, and Willis George Emerson, the author who wrote it all down in the Smoky God in 1908.
Emerson himself was quite a figure, wasn't he? Not just an author.
No. He was a lawyer, a developer, journalist.
Yeah.
Quite accomplished. He met Olaf, who was an old man by then, living out in California.
And it was literally on his deathbed that Olaf spilled the whole incredible and frankly terrifying story.
That's the account we have.
So our mission today, for you listening, is to really get inside this. We're diving into Olaf Jansen's story, the Hollow Earth, these giant people, a sun inside the planet. We'll look at his detailed claims, but also weigh them against some weirdly specific bits of evidence. Things like historical records that seem to check out, and descriptions of tech. Well, tech, that sounds like it shouldn't exist back then.
Yeah, definitely shouldn't in 1829. We want to explore why this particular story, the Smoky God, still grabs people's imagination.
Okay, let's start at the beginning. The journey itself, what kicked it off?
Well, it was a mix, really. Part prophet, part something deeper. Olaf was young, just 19. He and his father, Jens, set out from Stockholm, April 3rd, 1829.
Heading north towards Franz Josef Land. Standard enough fishing route, maybe.
Initially, yeah. Jens was this big, strong Norwegian guy, apparently deeply religious, but Norse gods, Thor, Odin, that sort of thing.
Oh.
And he'd had a good run before, finding valuable ivory up north. So part of it was definitely trying to score big again.
But you said something deeper.
Yeah. Jens truly believes the old Norse legends. He believed that somewhere beyond the north wind, past the ice, there was this hidden, beautiful land, better than anything known.
So it wasn't just about fishing or ivory. It became an exploration driven by folklore.
Pretty much. That conviction pushed them further than maybe they first intended.
And things start getting strange as they push north, right?
Oh, yeah. Way past the usual boundaries.
Yeah.
First anomaly, they land on this small, kind of barren island. And what do they find? Massive logs of driftwood.
Like how massive?
Huge. Some described as, 4 feet thick, maybe 12 meters long. Just lying there.
In the high Arctic, where would giant trees like that even drift from?
Exactly. That was the first big question mark. Then came the climate.
It got warmer.
Significantly warmer.
Where?
The further north they went, the warmer the air and water became. Warmer than coastal Norway, even. It completely defied logic.
That is bizarre.
Then they hit this monster storm, lost almost everything. Their fresh water supply was gone. Olaf was apparently terrified, thought they were done for.
I would be too.
But Jens, he stays calm, said a prayer to Odin, basically. And when the storm finally breaks, they find themselves floating in completely fresh water, drinkable water,
Okay.
in the middle of the ocean.
Okay, wow. Jens must have felt vindicated.
He totally did.
Yeah.
Saw it as proof Odin was watching over them. Olaf. He just couldn't explain it scientifically. And right around then, the compass goes nuts.
Spinning wildly.
Yeah, just spinning and spinning. Eventually, it sort of settled enough to give them a rough northerly direction, but clearly, the magnetic pole was doing something very strange there.
So warm water, fresh water, giant logs, wonky compass.
Yeah.
They're definitely in some kind of anomalous zone.
Absolutely. They were way off any known charts by this point. And then Jens points and shouts out, something about a smoky god.
The Smoky God. What was he seeing?
Up in the sky, there was this faint reddish light, a celestial body, but not the sun they knew. It was visible for hours, sometimes 12 hours straight.
But wait, it was high summer in the Arctic, right? The real sun would have been up almost 24/7.
Precisely. The actual sun was also visible higher up, so they figured this reddish thing, this false sun, wasn't just a reflection or an atmospheric trick. It felt like a real, separate object low on the horizon.
That must have been profoundly unsettling. The first concrete sign, they weren't just off course, but maybe somewhere
Yeah,
else.
that's how they took it. A threshold. And sure enough, a few days later, they see land.
And after all that ice.
Yep. Sandy beaches, and behind them, these vast forests with absolutely gigantic trees looked lush.
Wow. And they were still heading north.
As best they could tell, yeah. They sailed along this new coastline for 3 days, still generally northward, before finding the mouth of a huge river, freshwater.
And they went up it.
They did. They later found out the locals considered it one of their main rivers, possibly the Hiddekel, like the Tigris from biblical Eden.
Okay, so they sail inland. For how long?
10 days. 10 days up this massive river, and then they hear it.
Hear what?
Voices, huge chorus of voices, like singing or chanting coming from upriver. And then they see the ship. The Naz, exactly, translating to pleasure cruise. And Olaf described it as the biggest ship he could have ever imagined. Nothing like anything on the surface world.
And the crew. This is where it gets really wild, isn't it?
This is where scale just breaks. The men who came out to meet their little fishing boat, they were around 3.5 meters tall.
That's 11 and a half feet?
Yeah. And the captain, he was even taller. Closer to 4 meters, maybe 13 feet.
My God. Jens was a big guy, you said, 1.9 meters.
6'3", yeah. He barely reached their waists. Olaf was completely stunned.
I can only imagine. And the women.
Also, incredibly tall, maybe 3 to 3.3 meters, so 10, 11 feet. And everyone just radiated health, vitality. Looked young even if they were ancient.
Did they communicate?
The giants spoke a language Olaf couldn't understand at first, but he later thought it sounded like, or was related to, Sanskrit. They were friendly, though. Curious.
So they took them aboard the Naz.
They did. Gently lifted their small boat right onto the deck. And Olaf was amazed by the ship itself. It moved incredibly fast, but completely silently. No engines, no sails as he knew them.
But Jens, his father, he wasn't scared.
No, that's the thing. Jens looked around at these giants, the huge ship, the strange landscape, and according to Olaf, he just nodded. Said something like, "This is it, the land behind the north wind." The legends were true. He felt they'd arrived.
Amazing. So they spend time there, learn the language, and eventually figure out where they actually are.
That's the core claim. After learning more, talking to the inhabitants, observing the Smoky God sun, they deduced they were inside the Hollow Earth.
And Jens, the practical sailor, even tried to calculate the geology.
Yeah, it sounds a bit much, but Olaf claims Jens used their journey's distance, the apparent curvature of the inner surface, and observations of the inner sun to estimate the Earth's crust.
And he came up with?
Only about 480 kilometers thick, roughly 300 miles.
Wow, okay. That's incredibly thin compared to what science tells us. So that leaves a huge inner space.
Huge. By his reckoning, the inner world's diameter would be something like 11,750 kilometers. Almost as big as the outer surface's diameter.
And the Smoky God sun, how did they explain that?
Their theory, or what they learned, was that this central sun reddish, dimmer than ours, was stationary, held in the exact center by gravity or maybe some kind of vacuum effect.
So it doesn't orbit or move?
No, it just hangs there. It's the Earth's rotation that makes it seem to rise and set from the perspective of someone on the inner surface. Just like our sun appears to move because we're spinning.
Okay, I can sort of picture that. And the smoky part.
Apparently the sun had a dark side or maybe a base that faced away from the main light source. And this dark part was dotted with tiny perforations, little holes.
Like a colander?
Kinda, yeah. And through these holes you could see, well, maybe the void or maybe distant light. It created the illusion of a night sky with stars. That's why they called it the god of smoke or fog.
It's a surprisingly detailed cosmology, isn't it? Internally consistent, at least within its own rules.
Very. And everything else seemed to match this grand scale. The life there was enormous.
Right. The plants and animals, give us some examples.
Okay, so grapes. Clusters were described as being like 1 or 2 feet long. And the individual grapes. Size of oranges.
Get out.
Size of a human head. Olaf specifically mentioned that.
And the trees we saw earlier.
Those forests they saw from the river. Some trees were said to reach 300 meters. That's nearly 1,000 feet. California redwoods barely top 100 meters. These things would absolutely dwarf.
Unbelievable. What about animals?
Same deal. Turtles, maybe 9 meters long by 6 wide, 30 feet long.
Giant turtles. Okay. Elephants.
Even bigger. He described elephants 22 meters high, that's over 70 feet and 30 meters long. Truly colossal.
Were there familiar creatures, too? Or just megafauna?
That's interesting. He mentions birds with enormous wingspans, like 9 meters, laying eggs maybe 2 feet high. But he also specifically noted seeing smaller birds, ones that looked very similar to species on the outer surface.
So not just a land of giants, but maybe a protected biosphere, preserving different scales of life.
That's one interpretation. It suggests a complex, ancient ecosystem. And the civilization itself, centered in cities like Eden and Jehu, seemed just as advanced, maybe more so.
Let's talk about that tech, because you mentioned earlier this is where the story gets really hard to dismiss as just 19th century fantasy.
Exactly, the transportation, for instance.
Yeah.
Olaf described traveling between cities on a kind of monorail, but it was completely silent and moved incredibly fast.
How did it work?
He mentioned something about it being stabilized by a large flywheel mechanism that somehow interacted with atmospheric pressure, like in creating a vacuum. It's vague, but the description of silent, super-fast rail travel in 1829, that's striking.
It really is. We're still working on perfecting that kind of thing today with maglevs.
Right.
What else?
The communication, this one is maybe even more startling. He described the inhabitants using a device, almost like a personal gadget, to communicate over vast distances. He said it worked using air currents. That's the phrase Emerson recorded. They could talk to each other instantly across the intercontinent.
Using air currents, that sounds, well, it sounds like radio waves. Wireless communication.
Doesn't it? And remember, this account is supposedly from 1829, written down in 1908. Nikola Tesla was only just getting patents for basic wireless transmission around 1903.
Yeah.
Olaf describing something akin to a mobile phone decades earlier is, well, it's notable.
Very notable. It suggests a civilization way beyond ours at the time. And their society reflected that longevity.
Oh, massively. People apparently lived for 600 to 800 years. They seemed almost timeless.
Good grief. Imagine the perspective that gives you. What about their culture? Education?
It was different. Education apparently didn't start until around age 30. And get this, they spent 10 full years dedicated just to studying music.
10 years on music. Wow. A very different set of priorities.
Seems so. A long-lived, technologically advanced, possibly quite serene culture.
So Olaf and Jen spent how long there?
About 2.5 years in total. Exploring, learning, living amongst these people.
And then they decided to leave. Was there a reason?
They visited the main capital, the city of Eden, which was on a high plateau. There, they met the leader, the great high priest.
And how tall was he?
Even taller than the ship captain. Olaf estimated 4.5 meters, nearly 15 feet tall.
Just staggering.
This high priest questioned them closely about the outer world, our world, and then he gave them a warning. He told them they could leave, but the journey back would be, quote, very dangerous.
A chilling warning. But they still wanted to go home.
They did. They missed their world, their home. So despite the warning, they prepared to leave.
How did they arrange the departure?
The inhabitants were helpful. They put Olaf and Jens, along with their original fishing boat, back into the mouth of that same river, the Tigris Hiddekel, where they'd first entered.
Okay, so back where they started inside, but immediately problems.
Immediately. They hit contrary winds blowing inland for 3 straight days. They couldn't make headway out towards the polar opening. And then Jens had a horrible realization. Time. 2.5 years had passed on the inside, which meant 2.5 winters had passed on the outside. The North Polar entrance they'd come through would now be deep in winter, completely choked with impassable ice.
Oh no, they were trapped.
It seemed like it. They couldn't go back the way they came. The warning from the high priest started to feel very real.
So what was the plan?
Jens came up with an incredibly bold, maybe desperate idea. If the North Pole was iced over, it meant the South Pole would be in summer.
Right, opposite seasons.
So he proposed they sail through the entire inner Earth, cross the internal world from north to south, and try to exit via the southern polar opening.
Sail across the planet's interior, that's audacious.
Absolutely. But it seemed like their only chance, and apparently they did it.
How long did that take?
Olaf reported the internal transit took about 40 days. Pretty quick, suggesting those interworld currents or winds were favorable.
Did they see anything interesting near the southern exit?
Yes, one specific detail Olaf mentioned was seeing penguins near the southern opening, but again, scaled up. He described them as being about 2.7 meters tall.
9-foot penguins. Okay.
So they make it through the southern opening and transition back to the outer world.
Was the transition difficult? From the red sun to our yellow sun?
Apparently that part was smooth. They emerged into the Southern Ocean, saw our familiar sun again, but then they hit the Antarctic ice fields.
And the high priest's warning?
It came true. The danger wasn't the transition, it was the surface conditions. They navigated through treacherous icebergs. They had one terrifying close call where two massive bergs collided, nearly crushing them. They barely escaped.
Heart-stopping, but they got through that.
They thought they were finally in the clear, sailing in open water, relatively safe. But they were sailing past this absolutely colossal iceberg. And suddenly, it just fractured, collapsed inwards.
Oh, God.
The rolling, collapsing ice generated huge waves and threw massive chunks everywhere. One struck their small boat violently. He was caught in the boat's rigging somehow, tangled up. When the wave hit and the boat capsized or was smashed, he was pulled under and drowned.
Horrible after everything they'd been through.
Just tragic. Olaf was thrown clear, miraculously survived, and managed to scramble into a floating piece of the iceberg itself, a piece maybe 15 meters high, freezing, alone.
How was he rescued?
Eventually, a Scottish whaling ship, the Arlington, spotted him. Captain Angus McPherson pulled him aboard. Olaf was hypothermic, probably delirious, but alive.
And then came the cruelest part of the story.
Yeah. Olaf, maybe naively, maybe still in shock, assumed these sailors would be fascinated. He tried to tell Captain McPherson the whole story, the journey north, the inner world, the giants, the smoky sun, his father's death, the escape south.
And the reaction.
The captain listened, then immediately declared Olaf insane, had him put in shackles, believed none of it.
Just like that, after rescuing him.
It's just like that. For telling this extraordinary tale, which had cost him his father and nearly his own life, Olaf Jansen was deemed mad. And when they got back to port, he was committed.
How long was he locked up?
28 years. From roughly 1834 until October 1862. Locked away in a mental asylum because his experiences didn't fit the known world.
28 years. That's just devastating. What did he do after he was released?
He eventually went back to fishing, apparently quite successfully, lived a quiet, guarded life, moved to the U.S., eventually settling near Los Angeles. But he kept the secret, terrified of being locked up again.
Until the very end.
Until he knew he was dying. That's when he sought out Willis George Emerson, around 1907 or early 1908. He finally unburdened himself, gave Emerson the manuscript, the maps he'd drawn from memory, and made him promise to publish it after his death.
And Emerson did. The Smoky God came out in 1908, but Emerson presented it as fact, right, not fiction.
That's the critical part. Emerson, despite having written novels before, framed this entirely as a true account. He staked his introduction on Olaf's veracity.
Which forces us, even today, to look at the details that seem, well, verifiable. Yeah. The circumstantial stuff.
Right, and this is where it gets tricky and intriguing for anyone looking into it. If Emerson just wanted to write a cool fantasy story, why anchor it with so many checkable real-world details?
Like what, specifically?
Well, records apparently confirm that Olaf Jansen resided in Illinois and later California around the time stated. More concretely, census and maritime records confirm the existence of the Scottish whaling captain Angus McPherson.
The one who rescued him and had him committed?
The very same.
Yeah.
Records show an Angus McPherson, born 1796, listed as a commercial mariner, operating whaling ships during that period. That's a specific verifiable person named in the account.
That is harder to dismiss than just saying a whaling ship rescued him, naming the captain and the captain being real.
It adds a layer of, well, could this part be true? And then you circle back to the technology descriptions.
The silent monorail and the air current communication device.
Exactly. Again, for a story supposedly originating in 1829, described in 1908, those concepts feel jarringly ahead of their time. The wireless communication especially. How would Olaf, a simple fisherman, or even Emerson in 1908 conceive of something so close to a mobile phone?
It wasn't common knowledge or tech back then, not even close.
Not at all. Tesla's work was cutting edge, known mostly to scientists, not the general public, and certainly not in the form Olaf described.
So it leaves you, the listener, with this really core question, doesn't it? Was Olaf Jansen just an incredibly imaginative man, maybe traumatized by some Arctic disaster we don't know about, who confabulated this elaborate story that tragically cost him 28 years of freedom?
That's one possibility, a detailed, consistent delusion born of trauma.
Or did he actually experience something like what he described? Did he see technologies in a world so advanced that his recounting of it sounded like madness in the 19th century, but includes details that only start to make sense in the 20th or even 21st?
That's the alternative. That the story that cost him so much might have been, in its essentials, true, and the verifiable details, the ahead-of-its-time tech, are crumbs supporting that.
If you step back and look at the bigger picture here, what does this story represent? True or not?
Well, whether it's factual history or incredible fiction, the Smoky God taps into something really primal, I think. That ancient human curiosity, maybe even need to know what's beneath our feet. Is it just rock and fire, or is there more?
A hidden world.
Exactly. Jansen's story provides this incredibly detailed, almost plausible blueprint for such a world. Specific geography, physics, biology, technology, culture. It's compelling because of that specificity, true or not. It gives form to that ancient what if.
Okay, let's really unpack this as a final thought for you listening. Think about today. Polar exploration, especially around the geographic poles, is difficult, expensive, and often restricted. Areas are heavily monitored by satellites, radar, governments.
Yeah, you can't just sail up there easily like Olaf and Jens supposedly did.
Right. So if there was some kind of opening, intermittent, or hidden, maybe the only way to truly confirm or deny a story like Olaf's wouldn't be with our current surface-level tech. Maybe it would require something closer to the very technology he describes inside. Or at least the tech Willis Emerson wrote down based on Olaf's account.
Like needing advanced tunneling or sensing tech far beyond what we commonly deploy.
Perhaps. Or maybe even needing access we simply don't have. So the provocative question is, what might we be fundamentally misunderstanding about our planet simply because we've accepted the solid Earth model for centuries and we aren't seriously looking for evidence down instead of just out or up? Are we missing the giants because we refuse to believe they could even exist beneath us?